I can have a perspective and you can have a perspective, and they can both have validity. It doesn't have to be you're right or I'm right. Because we have different experiences, different backgrounds, all that sort of thing, we're going to see things differently.
I called up with someone who's an expert in conflict resolution, difficult conversations, and effective communication, Scott Dutton.
Being able to understand each other, even if we have different values, even about how do we move forward.
He's the co-founder of Fighting Fair, an organisation that for over 21 years now has been passionate and focused on helping turn conflict into growth and opportunity. He's spoken to crowds of thousands, and over 1,500 organisations have trusted him to help them be better.
Expectation is one of the top 4 causes of conflict. The other big ones, assumptions and misunderstandings, but expectations are high up there. So it's about stepping back and going, is it reasonable to expect that?
Scott, welcome to Share.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's great to see you, and I can't wait to see the energy and feel the energy through this podcast episode.
Yeah, no, I'm keen. It's an interesting sort of idea you have that there's not a lot of structure.
No, it's very conversational, and it's interesting. I have a lot of guests that say to me, "Oh, I've never been asked that question," or "Well, that's interesting. I got to talk on that topic," and because a lot of the time when people come on a podcast, people just want to get really granular in regards to what they want, and the information and the knowledge that they want to dig into. But I find that there's so much more into someone's story, and sometimes there can be some really, really good nuggets and gems that are kind of unlocked.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I just ran a training yesterday on group facilitation. I've actually added up for this group. I've run 1,212 trainings in my time, and we were talking about the importance of stories and how engaging they are as a trainer or presenter. You know, that's a really important part of keeping people engaged.
And one of the key things I think as well is that for people to know that, yes, they listen to others' stories, but there's actually their story. Everyone has a story within them. And if they can listen to that story internally and actually learn from that story, there's some things that they can learn. There's some things that can be taught in their own journey.
Yes. Yep. No, it's great. And, you know, I facilitate in a way where people really contribute a lot. So heard some great stories yesterday about some of their experiences as trainers and presenters, and even what stories they share with the participants, and you know how powerful they can be.
Yeah, that's awesome. Excellent. Now, on the subject of storytelling, I'd love to ask, what's your story?
Well, I guess it depends whether you want the personal one or the professional one.
Well, I think a mix.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, my personal stories and I do talk about my personal story because there's, I guess, aspects of that have really, like everyone has guided me in a way to where I am today. And my personal story is a bit of a challenging one, actually. So my father died actually when I was about 1. So it was a heart virus, is unexpected, and quite obviously I don't remember, but pretty significant, especially for my mum. And then I have an older sister, and then there's me. So we were left with mum, and then mum sort of remarried a couple of years later. And then her and Barry had a couple of kids. So I got a couple of half brothers. And then mum got cancer when I was, I think it must have started when I was in grade 5. And she tried to fight through that, but she lost her battle, and passed away when I was 12 years old. And so it was a pretty challenging sort of teenage years, I guess. I didn't get on that well with my stepfather at the time. You know, I now understand he was doing his best and tried his best, but at the time I was struggling, and didn't sort of get the emotional support, I guess, was lacking in that. He did the physical stuff, but you know, he's dealing with his own grief, obviously, trying to raise 4 kids, which would be pretty tricky. And yeah, so I just struggled as a teenager. I was lack confidence, total lacking of
Mm.
confidence, but also pretty unhappy, and that sort of unhappiness carried on into my 20s. And yeah, I ended up going through a few bouts of depression, which I think you've had that experience too. And anyone
Yeah.
else who's had that, it's not much fun.
No, it's not.
And sort of, yeah, get caught in those rabbit holes of darkness, I guess. And yeah, really hard to get out of. And so that suffering, I guess, led me to traveling to an ashram in southern India to start to practice meditation and mindfulness. And so, yeah, that was actually, I was there back, been over 14 times, I think now. And I was there in January with the family. And yeah, I think that was 27 years ago when I first went to India and, yeah, started really trying to practice and, trying to learn about my mind really and my heart, and so it's been a journey to find my center and not get swept up in thoughts that some of those were quite unhealthy from a
Mm.
background that's had some fairly distorted thinking, I guess, like we all do to some degree. But yeah, so it's helped me to really learn to not follow thoughts. And that's probably been my big thing, as well as having an open heart. So they've been my big focuses, I guess, for a long time. And I've been able to bring some of those concepts into the training or presentations I've done through our company Fighting Fair, which pretty much runs trainings and presents on conflict and team culture and difficult conversations, those sort of areas. And it's been, I guess I started to see the parallel between that mindfulness
Mm.
personally and then professionally, how we also need to be very mindful and the impact if we're not as well. So that's my journey in a nut, in a very small.
That's awesome. So talk to me about what led you to conflict going into that
Oh,
industry.
look, I mean, probably unconsciously because I'd fought with my stepfather. But after high school, I went and did a science degree. I majored in psychology and biochemistry. But from there, I sort of wasn't sure where to go, and I got into sales, and I wasn't very
Mhm.
good at that. Um, and then I sort of ended up volunteering for an agency out near where I lived, out in I lived in One Turner in Melbourne, and there was an agency in Ringwood not far that was I just went and volunteered. I don't know, I can't remember how I ended up there, but I ended up volunteering for to help with doing mediation for young people and parents. And so I I found it really interesting. I liked it, and I sort of felt, no, I mean, it's a skill. It takes a while to get good at, but I felt fairly comfortable. So I went back to Melbourne Uni and did a social work degree, and then spent 9 years working with parent-adolescent conflict, um, young people more or less at risk of homelessness, trying to prevent them being homeless and just being able to sort through some of those issues between them and their parents.
Yeah. And what did you learn most in that time dealing with parents and adolescents? Obviously, you'd come through having some conflict in your own upbringing.
Mm. Been doing this, our company's just gone 21 years old. So did a little reflection and what's changed in all that time. But the funny thing is that whether I'm doing conflict, I don't do so much parent adolescent now, it's more workplace. But I think that whole thing about feeling heard and understood, I mean,
Mm.
it almost comes down to that, being able to understand each other, even if you see things differently, and a willingness to do that. And then once there's an understanding, it's about how do we make this work, even if we
Yeah.
have different expectations or differences or values, even about how do we move forward.
Yeah. Cause it's
So
probably one of those it's one of those things in life, parents and kids. It can sometimes be a very interesting relationship, and even some of those things that happen in that adolescence,
Yep.
it can kind of carry on throughout life. That there's some resentment, or there's a lot of feelings that kind of stay with both the parent and the child as they move forward through life.
Yeah, and I think there is. I mean, I had, a fair bit of baggage that I sort of, I guess, blamed a lot on my stepfather. And, probably as I got older, I had to learn to let go of that and probably have a better understanding of what he was dealing with at the time.
Mhm.
And it's that acceptance of where people are at and who they are.
Yep.
I get on really well now with Barry, and we have a good relationship, but I had to let go of a fair bit of stuff to get there. And probably some of it was justified, but probably quite a bit wasn't.
Yep.
Because you can find scapegoats pretty easy when you've got a lot of stuff, I reckon.
Yep.
Who do I blame? And it was all pretty unconscious, but I slowly, and Fiona helped a lot with that as well. Just my partner just becoming more aware that, holding on to this isn't going to be very helpful.
Yeah. And it's interesting as well, when you talk about conflict, I find in life that a lot of the time conflict comes from, or the frustration that leads to conflict comes from our expectations on others, and
Yeah.
that they're not meeting our expectations of what they should do, what they should say, how they should act. And we kind of push that onto them, and you kind of go, well, actually, they don't have to do or say or be what we think they should be.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Expectation is one of the top 4 causes of conflict. It gets in the way. It's like the other big ones, assumptions and misunderstandings. But expectations are high up there because, even in the workplace, what you expect of one another or what someone should or shouldn't be doing can definitely lead to conflict. So it's about, sometimes stepping back and going, is it reasonable to expect that?
Yep.
I do like the reasonable test. Is that a reasonable, point of view, expectation? Yeah, I think it's helpful.
So when it comes to mindset, how do we shift our mindset when it comes to conflict in our personal relationships and also in our professional relationships?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a tricky one because the problem with conflict is that people get caught up in the emotion. And they get caught up, and you're probably aware of this, the whole physiology of the brain, and we go down into the reptilian brain or the limbic, the amygdala, and we get sort of caught in that emotional, that sort of almost survival response. And so we need to get out of that to be able to actually think clearly, and that's one of the challenges. So how do we move out of that? Because if we're stuck in that, we're very narrow in our thinking, and we're much less likely to be open to the other person's perspective. And that's a big challenge, because if you don't go in curious, if you don't go in open to with a willingness to hear the other person's perspective, it's going to be very hard to move forward. So that's part of the challenge. How do I get myself in the right, because I run obviously training on difficult conversations, and that's a big part. What's your purpose going in? What's your mindset going in? How open are you? How much do you think you're right? And how much are you willing to hear the other person's perspective? And if we don't have those right, we're more likely to escalate it than actually help to resolve it.
Yeah. And do you think conflict mainly comes from poor communication and not kind of putting forward our needs or discussing, obviously, those difficult conversations that we need to have?
Yeah, look, I think it's tricky because there's not many people that go, "Ooh, I'm off to have a difficult conversation." I get called into teams where their culture is actually really poor. And one of the big reasons is that either try to do the conversation but they didn't do it very well, or they put it off. And
Mm.
then it sort of festers, and then it impacts other people in the team, and then the culture can be impacted pretty quickly and become quite unhealthy. So, yeah, it's about, I think for me, it's about people having a really clear model in how to
Mm.
have those conversations so they don't put them off, and they go in with the right intent, the right purpose, and the right way to go about having those conversations. Because, yeah, I just think it's a very tricky thing to do well, and not many people feel comfortable or confident
Mm.
having those conversations. So if they have a model, and especially if it's a shared model where they all have that model, then it becomes a lot easier to have that conversation, because they know the purpose is to understand each other.
Mm.
That's my purpose today, is to understand. You understand me, I understand you, and then we find a way forward that's going to work for us both. And if you've got that purpose, it takes a lot of the heat out of it. It doesn't become, it's much less likely to become adversarial.
Yeah. So for listeners that are listening to this podcast or watching it, talk to me about, if someone's in conflict at the moment, if someone needs to have a difficult conversation with someone, what is that model? What are the things that they should be asking themselves before they go into that interaction?
Yeah. So the first thing is, how willing are they to hear the other person's perspective? There's a great, and I think you went to that one, Steve. I spoke at ARIC 2019. As I'm sure many of your listeners would know, it's the biggest real estate conference in Australia. And John McGrath called me out of the blue and just said, "Can you come and speak on difficult conversations?" And one of the concepts that I love, and I heard this at Harvard, and it's just a really simple concept, and it's the AND stance. So AND, AND stance. And there's two components to it. One is, I can have a perspective and you can have a perspective, and they can both have validity. It doesn't have to be you're right or I'm right. We can both be able to have a different, because we have different experiences, different backgrounds, all that sort of thing. We're going to see things differently. And so it's that ability to say, hey, I can have this view and you can have a very different view, and that's okay. So the first one is embracing that. And the other part of the AND stance is not use the word but. Because as soon as you say the word but, what it says is that what you just said does not count. And so we've got to be just really careful. So I really like that concept. So it's going in with that AND stance in mind. It's about the ability to, I think you used the word assertive before. It's balancing assertiveness with empathy. So I want to share my concerns, right? I'm hoping that you will hear what my thoughts are, how I see the situation, what my concerns or key issues are, and it's making sure that I'm open and encouraging you, so that I'm hearing your concerns and what's going on for you and your perspective. So it's little graph I use, it just has empathy on one axis and assertiveness on the other, and we want to get the balance between the two. So that's the other. And then, of course, going in open, curious, and with that purpose of understanding. And once we've got an understanding, this is just like, I've done 500 formal mediations, and a difficult conversation is a bit like doing a mediation, except you don't have a mediator there to facilitate. So, so it makes it a bit harder in that way. At least if you've got a mediator there, they can keep it constructive. But really, the process is the same. Both parties come in, they have a say, they raise their key issues or concerns. We then identify what those key issues are from their statements, and then we negotiate one issue at a time to try to reach some understanding first, and then we find solutions. And it's exactly the same in the difficult conversations, about both parties hearing each other, understanding each other, even if they see it differently, and then going, okay, right, you see it this way, I said, how do we move forward? What's going to work for us both?
And an element to that strategy going into conflict is very much about dialogue as well, yeah, and using the right dialogue. So, not going into an argument and starting with you this, you that,
Yes.
you this.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
this is
Yep.
how I
My
feel. This
statements.
is how it
Yep.
makes me feel.
Yep.
I think, I feel, rather than
Yes.
the yous.
That's right. And I think that links in really nicely with being careful of assumptions.
Mm.
You might say, well, I feel like this, and you're basing that on something that you have interpreted that I may or may not have done. And so it's like I always like, and when I do my team culture training, I do this great activity. It's called above and below line behaviors. I don't know if you've heard of that one, Steve.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So as you know, so the above the line is what you want to see and celebrate, and the below line is what you do not want to see nor tolerate. And I really like it. And so this is often with teams that are struggling with their culture, and we do a whole lot of other things where they work out what their issues are and they start working on them as a group and come up with an action plan, all that sort of stuff. But I like this little activity that I do after all that. They've sort of had a chance to voice their concerns and work on the solutions to those issues. But then when I do the above and below, it makes sure that we haven't missed anything. So they come up in groups with all the stuff they want to see and all the stuff they don't want to see. And one of the things I really like is when they have giving people the benefit of the doubt, because that's what I think we need to do in a difficult conversation is the assumptions, negative assumptions, almost the opposite of giving people the benefit of the doubt. And I see that in conflict a lot where parties come in and they've made up assumptions, misunderstandings, and they've actually created a whole lot of stories about this other person that often are not true.
Yep. And those things, those stories and those things that they're assuming
Yes.
build up over time. The longer
Yes.
you avoid something, the longer you avoid a difficult conversation or, a
Yes.
difficult situation, your brain keeps going into that.
Yes.
I think this, I think they're doing this. I think they're,
Yes.
doing this behind my back, or I think
Yes.
this is why they're doing this. And that just builds up and you've got more and more baggage to unlock. So when you have that conversation or that, I suppose that environment explodes to a point where something comes out, then you're not coming from a place of understanding. You're coming from a place of resentment. You're coming from a place of deep hurt and unresolved anger.
That's right, which is often not true. I mean, I don't know if you've watched Suits, the series, but
Love it.
Lewis Litt is a good one for that one. He creates all these stories that are often totally off track. and he's a good example of that, where he interprets something. Often it's way off track, and then he gets himself very angry and fired up about it, and he has a go at the person, and often he apologizes 10 minutes later.
Yep.
Hilarious.
It's interesting. Before we get back into the episode, from time to time you might have a burning question, a guest recommendation, a comment, or some feedback, which I always appreciate. If so, I'd love to continue the conversation after this episode, so let's connect. I'm easy to find, but the best place to engage and connect is on Instagram, @TheSteveHodgson. But that's enough from me. Let's get back into the episode. Talk to me about the role of emotional intelligence in conflict and communication.
Look, I mean, it's tricky. As I said earlier, it's like that. We're almost, if I could say it this way, we're almost fighting against our brain physiology when we get into conflict, because often we do feel not physically threatened so much, more psychologically threatened. And when we feel psychologically threatened, we are going down into those lower brains. So to be emotionally intelligent, we need to first of all be aware of that. And that's where I think the concept of mindfulness is so powerful, because mindfulness is about being aware of what's going on for you. And obviously also being able to tune into the other person. But the first thing is noticing where you're at. And if you're in those lower brains, which more or less means you feel really stressed, you're clouded, you're not clear, that means you're not going to be thinking with the frontal lobes and neocortex. So you're not going to probably be very productive trying to sort out the conflict when you're in those lower brains. So the first thing for me, emotionally intelligent, is being aware of yourself, knowing what state you're in, and how do I get myself into the right mind state, the right emotional space to be able to have a conversation where I'm not going to escalate. I'm not going to either escalate or shut down, because shutting down's not helpful either. And be able to find my center to, the best I can, that I'm not going to say or do something that's not going to be helpful. And so it is a challenge, because most of us will get caught up in emotions in a conflict. And that's what makes it a conflict, is when we're caught in emotions. So emotional intelligence plays a really big role in ensuring that we're not having the conversation when it's not wise to. And then when we're having the conversations, again, it's being able to tune into ourselves to know what's going on, and also for the other person, when are they escalating or shutting down, and getting that early enough. So that's all part of that, I think, emotional intelligence, that we're able to notice what's going on, so especially our emotions and the other person's, and being able to manage that in the moment, and also being smart about when I might have that and what state I'm in, to be able to have that conversation that's going to keep it constructive.
And Scott, we've all got varying levels of emotional intelligence. What have you found, or is there any strategies that you recommend that people look at to increase their emotional intelligence?
Well, I do run a course on it, Steve.
There we go. Small little plug.
Oh, look, I do you know what? I mean, I think it's making the effort to become more focused on it. It's a bit like, mindfulness is one component of emotional intelligence. So the more you take the time to reflect and just go, okay, where am I at? How am I feeling? What's going on for me? That's going to be a really powerful tool in being able to deal with strong emotions. So look, I think meditation, mindfulness is really, really useful for creating greater emotional intelligence. And then there's like the training I do has sort of 7 components to emotional intelligence. So it's sort of just learning about it and then trying to practice it, because every component can be improved. Obviously we're born with different things and traits and all that sort of stuff, but they have found that every component of emotional intelligence we can all learn and grow. So it's about, I think, to me, anything you want to get better at, you have to give it the focus.
Yeah.
And
it's having that, it's having that awareness. So, like I put something up on a story the other day about, if you just go and sit in nature and you just close your eyes and you take some deep breaths and you smell and you listen, right, to all the different things that you can hear out in nature, the birds, whatever's going on in your environment.
Yeah.
It's a bit like that with emotional intelligence. It's being able to sit and have a wider and a broader awareness around what's going on, and then tapping into it might be the body language of someone that's like, okay, they're looking a little bit sad, or they're looking angry, or those kind of things, and being able to pick up on those deeper emotions and those deeper feelings, because we all show a lot of the time how we feel. Not always, but a lot of the time, if we're in a mood, I know my family says to me, we know when you're feeling anxious, or we know when you're frustrated, or we know when you're not feeling quite right, because your mannerisms and your body language changes.
Yep. And it's interesting, because it's like, is it easier to see in others, or is it easier to see in yourself? And I think when we're in an off mood, it's probably easier for others, especially your partner or your kids or whatever, to see that sometimes than we are even going, oh yeah, oh yeah, I'm feeling a bit off or whatever, Um, in conflict, it's funny. I think people get more self-absorbed, so they
Right.
probably are more focused on themselves, but whether they're conscious of their emotional state, and being able to step outside of that is probably the more challenging part. Um, but I find that most people are more focused on themselves than they are on the other, and that's not always helpful either.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
So a good tip for people to switch that around, or have a conscious, I suppose, thought around switching that around when you're coming into conversations or environments where you're
Yeah.
dealing with other people.
Yeah, in fact, that reminds me of when I run my emotional intelligence training. One of the little activities I do is I get people to think about a recent conflict they've been involved in, and I get them to write down what's been the impact on them, and also what they feel the other person didn't or doesn't understand from their perspective. And so they do that, and then I get them to do something a bit more challenging. I get them to step into the other person's shoes who they're in conflict with and try to write down the same things. What's been the impact on the other person, and what do they feel you don't understand from their perspective?
Yeah, that's powerful.
And people struggle with it.
Yeah, but it's powerful if you can unlock the ability to do that. You can actually shift your thinking and shift your mindset, and also shift your perspective some way, which then allows you to be more empathetic, understanding,
Yes.
and compassionate in conversations.
And even just trying to think from the other person's perspective, how would they see this? What would their concerns be? Or why would they find this difficult? Or what am I? Because, in conflict, most people just blame each other. That's one of the big obstacles or traps people fall into. And so to be able to try to put yourself in the other person's shoes is just really helpful, because it helps you step out of that blame game and sort of go, oh, okay, how may have I contributed to this situation, rather than just look at what the other person's done, because majority of people will point the finger.
Yeah, and we don't, as human beings, we're not built or, I suppose, designed to look in the mirror.
I mean, that's one of the questions I asked in my conflict training is why are we so quick to blame? Why do we point the finger? We see kids do it, but adults do it as well. And what's the sort of psychology behind that? What's the reasoning? And I think a lot of it's to do with feeling threatened, or feeling shame, or feeling vulnerable. And I think there's some of the reasons why people find it hard to take ownership. And the old ego, the ego feels threatened. And I listen to a lot of Eckhart Tolle, and I just like his stuff. It's very simple. And, he talks a lot about how easily our ego is threatened, and how much we really struggle with that, and it links to identity and how we see ourselves and how other people may see us. It's a really challenging thing to manage.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, we're always deflecting.
Yep.
We're always getting defensive, and we're always blaming
Yep.
others because it's a protection mechanism
Yep.
that makes us feel better.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the ego wanting to defend itself and not feel vulnerable and not be diminished.
Yep.
So it's interesting.
You've spoken in many workshops. You've spoken to well over 50,000 attendees. Talk to me about your most memorable experience, if you've got one, in regards to a presentation or an event.
Well, I must say, Arik was one of the biggest highlights for a number of reasons. One is the biggest audience I've spoken to. I think there was close to 3,500. Two, I'd never spoken to real estate agents before, so I had no idea what you guys talked about. But I did have 6 months to prepare after John rang, so I did do quite a lot of research. And yeah, and I took some real risks in that one too. So the funny thing is that I've been presenting for a little bit. I've been training for a long time, but presenting was sort of newer to me. And the biggest audience I'd done before Arik was about 120 people. So
Wow.
So there's a whole lot of things that were like, I had to, I guess it was almost like limiting beliefs.
Yes.
What were some of the limiting beliefs I had about myself, about my skill as a presenter or speaker? And so there's a lot of things I had to challenge in that to do, Eric, and to do it well and go on confident. And even within that, I tried an activity that I had no idea whether it was going to work with that number of people as a little handshake exercise. And I don't know if you remember it, but it was, it was a risk. And I think,
Yeah.
that's what stands out when I try something I could stuff it up really bad. But I back myself and I have a go, and sometimes I do stuff it up and it doesn't work, and then I got to go, okay, would I try it a different way, or was it just that group, or yeah. So I think that's a memorable one because there was so many, and actually a week before, I think John told me, or Tom, I can't remember, but said, "Oh, by the way, it's in the round," and I had no idea what the in the round was, and I thought it's just going to be a normal stage, and then I'm going,
Yep.
"What? It's like a boxing ring. What do I do with that?"
Good for
um,
conflict.
sorry. Wow, it was just I went, how do I make that work? But anyway, I really enjoyed it, and yeah, got to know Tom Panos really well after that too. So we've stayed in contact, and obviously done some more work in the real estate world, which has been really interesting because I really had no idea before, Eric, about. I mean, I'd sold a house and bought a house, and that was about it. So I've certainly understand the real estate world and the sector, and how challenging some of that world is to be able to do well, but also obviously they have to have a lot of difficult conversations, a lot of negotiation skills as well. So
I wanted to ask you, Scott, um, obviously being a somewhat expert in conflict management, emotional intelligence, communication, does that ever come back to bite you in your personal life?
well, my partner's a counselor, so how do you reckon we go? Oh, look, it's interesting because it's always more challenging to put into practice yourself. I,
Yep.
I know the theory. I try to do it, and a lot of times I do it well, but sometimes I get caught up. We all have our triggers and our emotional baggage. Don't always see that clearly, so I'm certainly guilty of not always practicing what I preach.
Yep.
um, but look, I try to do it, and I try to. We come from, because we go to India a lot. We've sort of embraced some of those Indian concepts of one of them's just being dharmic, and what that term. I don't know if you've heard of that term, Steve, but there's a few different. There's a Buddhist sort of definition of it, but the way I understand it's more about it's just trying to do the right thing, and that's sort of our philosophy. In fact, our company, the sort of not the trading name, but the company name's the Dharmic Practice, and that's what we try to do, is just trying to do the right thing by people all the time, and we try to do it with each other too.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, as a speaker, and obviously you do a lot of workshops, you do a lot of travel. I know
Mm.
that, but talk to me about your daily non-negotiables when it comes to your health, your wellness, and well-being.
Look, I'm not a big gym guy, but because we live, in the hinterlands of Byron, we usually go down for a walk by the beach, which we did this morning. Um, I like to get out in the water and have a swim. I love the ocean, so I love catching a few waves. I've got a longboard. I'm not that good at that, but I actually still get on my boogie board. This old fella getting on his boogie board. But anyway, I love it. I love catching waves. So we've got such nice beaches in Byron. It gets a bit busy over summer, but we've got the back beach and the front beach, and you can sort of choose a little bit. So that's probably my main way, and meditation every day. So I try to meditate twice a day. Doesn't have to be super long. We might do 15 minutes in the morning. We usually do that together, Fiona and I, and then I do a little bit at night as well. And look, I just know I need that. It's just so easy, I think, to get caught in thoughts and stories. And, it has taken me, I'm in some ways I can be smart, and otherwise I can be really stupid. Because it's taken me 27 years to go, I don't have to believe all my thoughts, and I don't have to get caught in these stories. And, so it's still sometimes a challenge to not get caught up in stuff, and especially those repetitive things. So I know for me that meditation and mindfulness is just something I need to do to keep my center. And then we try to eat healthy. We're in Byron, so we're vegetarian/vegan. You have to be in Byron. That's one of the requirements. No, actually, we went to Bali not long ago. We went to an Ayurvedic retreat, and I don't know if you heard about the doshas and different ways of, different foods that are good for you in different sort of dosha types. So, yeah, we try to eat pretty healthy, and so they're the main things, I think, and just trying to get that balance between not too much work and, having that time to have some downtime and not be thinking about work all the time, which is hard when you run your own business, to switch off sometimes. So that's the other thing we try to do, is not overdo work all the time.
Sometimes a challenge.
Yeah, well, Fiona's very much a big part of it. So she's often thinking of great ideas or writing things or social media posts and all that. So we're always sort of thinking about what we're doing and what's coming up next, and what we could be doing. And so, just make sure we have enough time off just to relax.
Yeah, perfect. Now, Scott, when you think about success, how has that changed throughout your life, and how do you define it today?
Yeah, look, it's a funny concept. It's an interesting concept, I guess. I mean, I think, how has it changed? Well, look, I came from, I guess sort of, how would I describe? We were middle class, but not lots of money. Went into social work, and that's got, this is a little bit limiting in its thinking around, particularly around money and things like success. Very, I think, different to the corporate world. But things have changed over the year. I mean, I think I've had to, again, challenge a few limiting beliefs about what I can or should charge and what I'm worth, those sort of things as well. So that's been an interesting journey. And then I think success is really, for me, success is being, I'm going to use the word happy, but peaceful. So if I can be centered, and my heart's open, and business is humming along, and we're having, little trips away and that sort of thing, that to me is we're doing pretty well. Being able to be grateful, trying to stay humble, not get too full of yourself. I think those sort of values of, doing the right thing and those sort of things are probably more how I mean, I like the idea of being in demand and, make sure that business is flowing. You're in that flow state. So they're sort of the things that that I think of when I think, I don't really use the word success so much, but just where I'd like to be sitting.
Yeah, perfect. And throughout your life, who would you say has been your biggest teacher?
Well, teacher. Well, Fiona's been a very good teacher. She spent 3 years in India meditating, so she's very good at mind and doing the right thing. So she's been very helpful. There's some Indian teachers that I've met as well that sort of able to have another perspective on things that you don't. I think we have a more limited way of seeing things in the West, and so they've been very powerful. Um, and I've had a few mentors along the way as well, just people that have been really helpful and guided as well. So um, yeah, and I think it's also trusting yourself. It's how well you tune into your own wisdom and intuition, and trying to work it out when it is your intuition and wisdom. um, so yeah, I think in the end, I think the more you can trust yourself, where it's not ego based, is really powerful too.
Through today's episode, we've talked about conflict and we've talked about emotional intelligence and communication. We've talked about difficult conversations, difficult environments. Can I ask, could you share what's the most difficult conversation you've ever had to have?
I think it's around death. There's been a few deaths in my family and Fiona's family, and having to get the news to share with another person about someone who's died that was fairly unexpected or fairly tragic. I think they're pretty hard.
Yep.
Yeah, I think they're the ones that come to mind. I think they're always really, there's no positive spin on it. It's just going to be hard for them to hear, and and how you might support them. So I think they're the difficult, really tricky ones. The ones I deal with a lot with other people, they are hard because they're people caught in emotion. But if you do it in the right way, you can get a really positive outcome. So I think the ones where you're delivering probably unwanted news that's going to have a real impact on the other person, I think they're really hard.
I want to ask one last question.
Yeah,
if you can
sure.
cast your mind forward and, you yourself today get to meet your 100-year-old self, what does he say to you?
I think just keep doing the right thing by people. So, if we're talking about business, yeah, I think just keep focused on the spiritual stuff as well. Maintain the meditation. Keep going to India. They're the sort of things I think, but who knows?
India is definitely on my list. That's for sure. And it's interesting talking about, earlier, and you just mentioned it there as well. Just do the right thing for people. And I think one of the hardest things in life is when we, us ourselves, we've got to do the right thing by people.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's not the right thing for ourselves.
Yeah, it's sort of like, what's the right thing to do here? So it doesn't mean you put your needs last. It's more about, it's just, I don't know. It's like, what's the conscience saying? What is the dharmic thing to do here? So that might be being assertive or being really firm or putting in boundaries too. It's not just pleasing the other person. That's not the right thing either. So it doesn't mean you don't speak up or be assertive or be clear or, put in boundaries where appropriate. It's just trying to, tap into that wisdom about what is the right thing to do here. And and it's sometimes a difficult question to answer. It's not always clear.
Yeah. So Scott, for anyone that is kind of wanting to reach out to you, wanting to get to that emotional intelligence training, book you as a speaker, just connect with you in any way, what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh, well, I've got two websites. So fightingfair.com.au is the training website. And so that has all the trainings on there. And we obviously do in-house trainings for organisation. I've done quite a few for different real estate groups. But the speaking website, we just released an on-demand difficult conversation training too. So that was an interesting journey. Never done that before. Spent 5 days filming and 200 hours editing. So anyway, that's great. We just wanted to make it really engaging. And speaking, I'm under scottdutton.com.au, and that has the core speaking topics there. So any of those websites, they can contact me and we can chat about what they need.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. And we'll drop those in the show notes as well. I wanted to thank you. I'm extremely grateful for your time in your busy schedule. And I just wanted to, just thank you for your insights in regards to conflict and communication, difficult conversations, and look forward to connecting with you again soon.
No worries, Steve. I enjoyed it. Thanks for all the great questions.
No, all good. It's been absolutely enjoyable. Thanks again, and we'll chat soon.
Thanks, Steve. Perfect.